This is October 30th in the year 2000. We are up here in the mountains at the Gentry. It's the cabin location where Les Rogers comes to think and enjoy fish. That's Les Rogers on the right, Lester R. Rogers. That's Herman Sember on the left. This is a continuation of the interviews sponsored by the History Committee for the Archives of the Health Physics Society. We started these interviews for the first Elda Anderson class the previous 2 days. Herman Sember, sitting on the left, has already been interviewed, and he's going to interview Lester R. Rogers. Now, we will at the end mention several other members who are not here in the class. This is the first class of Elda Anderson, and Lester Rogers also happens to be one of the qualifications for including in the interview is he's the first Elda Anderson awardee of all the Elda Anderson awardees. So with that, we will turn the interview over to Herman Sember, Professor Herman Sember.
In the flesh. Well, hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be interviewing one of the people who I think contributed as much as anyone else, and I sincerely mean this, to the field of health physics and radiation safety. This is Les Rogers, and Les, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your early life. Where are you from?
Well, I tell you, I was born in Mississippi, near the little town of Collins, and when I was less than 1 year old, my parents moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, to the Rio Grande Valley, because that's where all my mother's people were. And I spent the first 10 years of my life in the mountains of New Mexico. Did I say Arizona? New Mexico.
You said New Mexico.
Yeah.
The land of enchantment.
The land of enchantment. And during that period, of course, I learned to love the West. But when I was about 10 years old, they moved back to Mississippi, and then I spent 7 more years there as on a farm, and I finished high school, and then I joined the Army in 1940.
And what did you do in the Army, by the way?
Well, I was a captain, the rank of captain, and previous to getting my...
You ended as a captain.
I ended as a captain.
Enter?
That's right. I entered as a private, and I went through the ranks of corporal, sergeant, staff sergeant, and I went to the officer candidate school. And
were you in the infantry when you rose up through those ranks?
no, I was in the medical administrative corps, and I got my commission, I guess, in 1943 as second lieutenant, and I was put in charge of an ambulance company, the 586 Ambulance Company of the 3rd Army, and I rose to the rank of captain, and I went through 5 campaigns in Europe with the ambulance company.
And you left as a captain
I
and stayed in the reserve.
I left as a captain, and I maintained my reserve commission, and by the way, later on in 1950, towards the end of 1950, I was called back into service during the Korean War.
I remember I saw you, I think it was in 1954, in Operation Castle. You were in charge of radiation protection.
That's
out in the
correct.
Pacific.
Well, let's go back before, let's
right.
go back. And after you left the Army, what did you do?
Well, when I left the Army, thanks to the GI Bill, I entered the University of Southern Mississippi, and I got my BS degree there in chemistry, mathematics, and physics in the scientific area. And then I went to Tulane University, and for a short period, actually I was intending to do my master's work in physical chemistry, but I had the opportunity, the same as you did, of an offer of fellowship from the National Research Council to go to Oak Ridge to study health physics. And I must say, I'm very proud to be here with my two colleagues who are fellowshippers of the past millennium.
Fellowshippers, I like that term.
It is beautiful and wonderful up here in the mountains. Thank you, Lester.
By the way, it's in Arizona.
That's right, it's in Arizona.
You didn't mention that we're in Arizona.
I didn't mention that, okay.
Yes. I thought that you were a high school teacher for a year
Oh,
before.
I'm sorry, I was. When I got my degree, my BS degree, I taught high school physics, chemistry, and mathematics at Picayune, Mississippi High School. But that was only for 1 year. I only taught high school for 1 year. And then I went to, while I was at Tulane, I'd entered Tulane for graduate work. That's when I got the fellowship.
Okay, and why did you choose to take the fellowship rather than continue on as a high school teacher?
Well, it seemed to me that we were very fortunate for the National Research Council to select. There was only 12 of us, I guess, was it 12?
11.
11 of us throughout the United States for this, I think, honor. And the second point, it wasn't just the honor, it was an opportunity for what I thought to be a very interesting field of science that I would like to be involved in, because I was fascinated by nuclear energy and the possibilities, particularly of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It was obvious that there were great things to be accomplished, and I felt this was an opportunity to get into it. And most importantly, I was simply wanted to take advantage of every good educational opportunity that I could get.
Yeah, the important thing is to take advantage of opportunities.
That's right.
There's some famous quotation that escapes me at the moment that distinguishes between really smart people and those others, and the important difference is to seize the occasion, to seize the opportunity.
And you know, Herman, I think one of the things that really motivated me was what we had talked about before, is curiosity and the desire to learn and to know. I mean, I think both of us become very, very curious, and we don't stop until we try to find the answer.
I think that was a characteristic of all the people in our
Everyone
fellowship class. We were all intellectually curious, and we wanted to know things for its own sake because we wanted to know it,
That's
rather
right.
than how do we make a buck out of it.
That's exactly right.
So we were on this fellowship where we learned, none of us knew anything at all about the field before we entered into it. And I recall we were all very much concerned because when we finished, we didn't think that we were really knew enough to do anything constructive. And so what did, I know what I did, but this is about you. What did you do after you graduated from the fellowship?
Well, my first position was with Ohio State University, and I set up the radiation safety office there, and was responsible for all the accelerating machines. I worked a great deal in the university hospital because at that point there was a Dr. Morton and a Dr. Myers that was doing some very pioneering work in the use of cobalt-60 for interstitial implants, and they also were using radioactive gold for the treatment of peritoneal cancer, radioiodine for thyroid diseases, etc. And X-ray machines that were on the campus for the entire responsibility for radiation protection. And also a few lectures now and then to special groups on this whole subject of radiation protection, nuclear safety.
Well, that sounds as though it were a pretty interesting position. Why did you leave that?
Well, I was only there a year, and during this period, this was in 1951, I guess, during the Korean War, because I had maintained my reserve commission as a captain, I was called back into the service, and I was chief of health physics office at the Army Chemical Center near Maryland, because at that time there were programs going on in, that related to the use of radioactive materials and so forth in combat operations, etc. But in summary, I spent most of my time in that let's see, 50, almost 3 years that I was called back in on the weapons test out in the Nevada test site, and also the Operation Ivy, which took place in November the 1st, 1952, which was the first full-scale thermonuclear explosion, which was really a device, not a bomb. But I spent most of my time in that area while I was in, and then I asked to be released, and the Army tried to talk me into staying as a permanent commission.
What's called a lifer?
A lifer in the Army, and I really wasn't interested, and so in order to expedite my release, I resigned from my commission because I had an offer from the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission to go to Oak Ridge with Dr. Paul Aebersol in the Isotopes Distribution Program, which was one of the first peaceful uses of nuclear energy that started out of Oak Ridge. And I was the field representative for the northeastern part of the United States, several states, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, all up through the northeast, to assist physicians, hospitals, and universities in getting into the use of radionuclides in research and medicine, etc. And of course, I not only assisted them in terms of maybe the uses, but the emphasis was really on radiation safety to assure that with the distribution of radionuclides by the Commission, it would be done in a safe manner, because this was very important.
And how well did you succeed in this?
Well, of course, I'm not too objective, you know,
Well,
but I think I succeeded very well because I later advanced rather rapidly in the Atomic Energy Commission. I was brought to Washington in 1957, and I finished my service with the Atomic Energy Commission in 1975, and during that period I held many offices, including Deputy Director of the Division of Radiation Protection, and then Director of the Division of Radiation Protection, the Director of the Division of Radiological and Environmental Protection, I believe we called it. And then I ended up as the Director of the Director of Regulatory Standards with responsibility for the development of standards, performance standards, design standards for nuclear power reactors, chemical reprocessing, waste management, and for the entire field, including research activities and waste management for the entire aspect of standards in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy.
Well, it seems to me from this recitation of all these positions you had, and I can't repeat them all in that
No,
sequence.
I can't either.
However, it seems to me that what I can infer from this is that you went from someone in the trenches to someone who was setting policy.
That's
At the
correct.
end, you were setting policy, and so this was a gradual evolution And there were two questions I would like to ask in this. Number one, did anyone inspire you to continue your rise? And number two, I wonder if you could explain to us, since you wound up in a policy-making position, something about your philosophy of the integration of radiation safety with the uses of radiation sources for the benefit of mankind.
Yes, this is a subject on which I have very specific ideas. In terms of inspiration, I think Dr. Paul Aebersold, when I was working with him, he was director of the radioisotope distribution program. And he highly encouraged me to continue, and he felt that I had substantial promise with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. And the main thing that inspired me to go from the trenches, and I certainly started in the trenches, to the policy-making management aspect, is that I felt that the area of, I'm going to call it radiation safety or radiation protection, because I think it's a little bit more descriptive. I think people understand a little bit better than health physics, although certainly it relates to the health. But I felt that with respect to protecting workers, the public, and anyone involved with respect of the development of nuclear energy, the society involved, that you had to look at the area of nuclear energy in a very integrated way. And that is the design of the reactors, the design of the all of the facilities, the standards for design. I felt that it was extremely important to develop a body of standards which dealt with both the practicality of implementation as well as providing a very high degree of safety to the public. So I felt that radiation protection as such really included all of this area of design, of construction, of manpower development, because the best way to get high quality radiation safety is to assure that the staff and the operating staff of the reactors, of chemical reprocessing plants, of a medical laboratory, wherever it is, are well trained and they understand the risk involved and they understand the risk in the proper perspective. That not every gamma ray is going to cause damage, or there's a certain level of risk that you don't worry about. Now, and I felt most strongly that in the area of standards, it was extremely important to bring in, to not only have highly qualified people in government that really knew what they were doing with respect to developing standards, but also to bring in the expertise of the entire industry to work with government in developing a body of standards which is accepted by the industry, and also we assured that there was a appropriate level of high degree of safety in the standards. And we did this, we made a commitment with the American National Standards Institute. Am I going a bit?
No, this is fine, this is fine.
When I was made Director of Regulatory Standards, I made an agreement, we made an agreement, the Atomic Energy Commission, through me, made an agreement with the American National Standards Institute that we would assign, and this was through the Nuclear Technical Advisory Board of the American National Standards Institute, and I was put on the board of directors and on the executive committee, so that we had a very strong input into the policy and into the quality of the standards that were developed. And I committed within my directorate to assign a high-level technical man to every technical committee that was working on nuclear standards in the industry, to work right with the committee through the whole development of the standard. And if the standard came out with a level of safety which we considered acceptable, we would adopt this as a regulatory standard. And the industry was very, very cooperative, because, you know, the designers, the operators, the management within the utilities, they were just as interested in a high level of safety as we were in the Atomic Energy Commission. So through this mechanism, in the years about 1970 through 1975, there was a concerted first priority effort by the Commission to develop the body of standards. That's radiation protection standards, that's containment standards, that's seismic and geologic criteria standards, environmental protection standards, the entire area of standards for all aspects of the nuclear energy program. Nuclear power reactors, chemical reprocessing plants, even safeguarding of nuclear materials, in the area of use of radioisotopes in medicine, research, etc. We laid down at least we initiated the effort to develop a large body of standards in this area. We made great progress during those years of about 72 through 75, and of course, after the Atomic Energy Commission was abolished and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I guess.
NRC, yes.
NRC was formed. I'm sure that this effort was continued and even continues today. I should mention that I retired from the Atomic Energy Commission as of December the 31st, 1974, at which time the commission was abolished and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was initiated.
Well, I think that the success of your program and the continuing success is substantiated by the fact that I've read, and I'm into OSHA standards too, that by whatever criteria we have, by the number of injuries, the number of deaths, percentage of workers involved, longevity, as measured by age-specific death rates and so on, that the atomic energy industry and the workers in the atomic energy industry enjoy the best safety record of any industry that we have going.
No, I agree, Herman,
and I think we can, you get a very substantial share of the...
Well, no, the people that get the share is the wonderful staff that I had, the people and the real good, high quality technical people that worked with the ANSI standards committees and were so enthusiastic in supporting our effort. So I must tell you, I give all of the credit to the staff that...
well, however it was, you organized it so that it came out that way, and the fact still remains that the atomic energy industry is by far the safest of all the industries in the country.
Well, I think this was instilled into the nuclear industry because I must tell you, there's some of the years during the 1960s, there was not the kind of coordination between the industry and the commission that might have been. And you know, if you have even real good scientists working in government, more or less isolated from the practical realities of the industry, you simply don't get the product that you do of bringing in the people. You got one group writing the standards, you have another group that's implementing the standards. And by building into the standard the practicability of implementation means everything. Because if you really can't implement the standard, it doesn't mean a whole lot.
It's analogous to the relationship between science and engineering.
That's correct.
So the scientists develop all the theory, and it has to be applied practically by engineers.
But I must emphasize, I really think those of us in where we are primarily radiation protection should really broaden our thinking in terms of what is radiation protection. And it includes all aspects of the standardization, the design, the construction, the operation, manpower development, because there is where the safety really resides. It doesn't reside, the real safety does not reside in a person in the government, although it's critical that you have good people there. They perform an extremely important role. But it's this engineer out here at the controls, or the doctor who is administering radionuclides, or the researcher that's out doing research. It's right in that area that they have to be, you have to have good manpower development, and most important, a well-trained management at the top that really understands the concept of reasonable safety.
You remember Charlie Willis worked for you on some of those aspects of training, didn't he? Or even while you were
Well,
still
Charlie
there?
Willis was in one of my branches, but in terms of training, most of my career in actual training was done after I retired from the Atomic Energy Commission. I must tell you, there's one aspect I kind of left out I'd like to touch on, and that is an area, an event which I consider to be, for me, one of the highlights of my career. And that was when I was director of the Division of Radiological and Environmental Protection. That was after the National Environmental Policy, NEPA, of 1969, which greatly expanded the responsibility of the Atomic Energy Commission in the environmental area. And when NEPA was implemented, we were really not doing a very thorough job of looking at all aspects of environmental protection.
Excuse, can I interrupt?
Yes.
What was the impetus for the National Environmental Policy Act? Was it the Calvert Cliffs?
Yes, as related to the
Yes.
commission. Yes, there was a lawsuit. I don't recall who brought the lawsuit, that the Atomic Energy Commission was not giving the proper attention to the implementation of the National Environmental Policy Act. And there was a court decision called the Calvert Cliffs Court's decision. It related to the Calvert Cliffs reactors that were under construction.
Yes.
And we had at that time, I believe, it was about 110 construction permits out for new nuclear power plants. And the thrust of the decision was that we were given a specific time. It seemed to me like it was on the order of 2 years. I think that's about right, on that order,
I think so, as I recall.
to develop detailed environmental impact statements on all of those 110 reactors which held a construction permit. And the implication was a possibility of delaying or those construction, the construction activity until those environmental impact statements were developed. And my division was given the responsibility for implementing this. My staff was greatly expanded, and I must tell you, I must mention my deputy, Mr. Angie Giambuso, which is one of the finest men that I've ever worked for, both technically, managerially, and keeping the schedule, which was extremely important. And we had to start from scratch. The first thing we did was to develop a guide for the preparation of environmental reports, because we had to tell the reactors what we expected them to do in developing the statement. The report had to be developed by the commission. But the statement, the environmental statement, had to be prepared by the utility and submitted, I'm sorry, other way around. The utility had to develop the report and submit it to the commission developed the statement that was issued. So we developed a guide for the preparation of environmental reports so the industry would know what we needed, and then we had to provide also the guide for the preparation of environmental statements. And this included all aspects of environmental protection: thermal, chemical, biological, with great emphasis on nuclear safety, radiation protection, size. We had the entire spectrum. And this was one of the most difficult assignments I think that I ever had. And we were very successful. We really set the standard in government for the quality of environmental statements. And you can go look at many of the statements today, and you see they're extremely, extremely thorough. Well, we did meet our deadline, and fortunately there were no construction permits that were suspended. But I must tell you, I think that activity, most importantly, set a wonderful policy and standard for the ongoing use of nuclear energy, and I must say for many other areas, and I think, frankly, we gained the strong support of the Environmental Protection Agency because of the quality of the environmental statements that we issued.
Are these environmental statements extrapolated to other countries? Do other countries use them?
Yeah, well,
or international agencies, that it serve as a model? That's what I want to ask.
Well,
it serve as a model, for example, for the IAEA?
Well, I don't know as the IAEA adopted it as a model, but I think that it had a great impact in other countries. They may have taken a bit of a different approach here, there, and the other, but in France and Germany and Japan, I know in South America, in Argentina. I suppose I should mention that in the middle of my career in the nuclear safety and radiation protection area, in 1964, 65, and 66, the commission asked me to take 2 years out of my career, and I was assigned as the scientific representative for the Atomic Energy Commission for all of the 10 republics in South America. I had diplomatic status with my offices in Buenos Aires, and I worked with all of the 10 republics. I had wonderful, wonderful support from Dr. Glenn Seaborg, who was then chairman of the commission, that I admired greatly as a man and as a scientist. And Dr. Jerry Tate, who came to South America now and then to support me. And at that time, we were helping some of these countries with research reactors. And of course, in Argentina and Brazil, they had power reactor programs going. The Argentines designed a reactor of their own, and then I guess they purchased, I don't remember whether it was Westinghouse or combustion engineering, but anyway, my job there was simply to enhance the relationships between those countries there, their atomic energy activities, their atomic energy authorities with that of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. And it was wonderful, wonderful assignments. I would like to mention the chairman of the commission in Argentina, who was Admiral Kiliot, a very wonderful man. And we had the privilege of entertaining them not only there, but they came to Washington, and we entertained them in Washington. I must also say that the men that I work with, Dr. Dan Benenson or Del Gonzalez, at that time Dan Benenson was head of the radiation protection activity. And he knew that I had been working on, did a lot in developing Part 20, which was the ABC radiation protection standard. And he came to the embassy. We worked together in helping him to develop the Argentine activity.
I think Dan Benenson is a little unusual. He's a physician, he has an MD, and he also has a PhD in physics.
That's right, and a brilliant person.
Yes. But he's unusual having both an MD and a PhD.
He really is. But I was also a member of the ICRP Committee 4, and I had the privilege of working with Dan there and some of the other people that I work with. John Dunster from the United Kingdom, Dr. Jamay from France, many people in the International Atomic Energy Agency, because over my entire career I spent much time with the International Atomic Energy Agency on missions to many countries. And after my retirement from the Atomic Energy Commission, I spent really 25 years after I retired from the Atomic Energy Commission as a consultant to the Argonne National Laboratory. And we had a program, the U.S. had a program with the International Atomic Energy Agency of training people from the developing countries in many subjects, in just energy evaluation, for example. I mean, looking at the alternatives for the developing energy, the methodology.
Can I interrupt
yes.
you for one moment? This goes along, I remember you mentioning this, that despite all the regulations and all the engineering safety, finally you needed trained manpower to help implement this. And I believe your interest then in working with Argonne and the IAEA was to develop the trained manpower to implement all of these technical and scientific devices.
And that's exactly right. And during this we had many subjects and very strong. I brought into Argonne prior to me going to Argonne. The program was mainly dealing with general methodology of looking at energy possibilities and the selection of energy alternatives. But I pushed very hard to introduce reactor safety, nuclear safety, radiation protection, environmental protection, and those kinds of subjects. And we developed a postgraduate course in radiation protection. We trained during this 25-year period over 2,000 scientists from countries all over the world. And also during this period, I was working with the International Atomic Energy Agency in developing a model project for radiation protection in various countries, with the idea that you have to tailor each program, each training course or training program, it was really training programs, in each of the country to meet the specific needs which you expected them to develop in the nuclear energy area. And some of it related to use of radioisotopes in agriculture, medicine, etc. Others related to research reactors, others related to nuclear power plants. So the model project concept was to tailor a program for specific countries because a blanket approach simply wouldn't work. And during this period, we developed, we put on training, I managed training courses in many developing countries. Some of them was South Korea, Egypt, the Philippines, Malaysia, and I had the honor of putting together and managing the first training course on manpower development for nuclear power in Beijing, China, shortly after they came into the IEA. This course we developed and put on in Beijing in 1985. I think they came into the agency about 83 or 84, somewhere like that. And I must tell you that I first went to China, to Beijing, I think in January, to meet with the organizing group from the Chinese Commission and Utility. And we spent 5 days. I already had the syllabus prepared and so forth, but we went over and we agreed on this. And then I think the course was actually in maybe April or May. And we planned for 30 participants. I said, now we got to decide how many participants, and we need the top quality people you have. So they said, well, 30 participants. So that's what we planned for. So, and I had lectures from all over the world, from the United States, from Germany, from France, from Japan. The course was all given in English. And we arranged to identify, through working with the Chinese, an expert in the various fields of reactor safety. For example, they did have people who, and they were in the business of designing their own reactor at that time. They had specialists in containment, they had specialists in seismic geologic criteria, they had experts in the criticality aspect, in control systems, etc. So we identified an expert in each of those areas. We had a lecturer expert from one of the countries, U.S., Japan, France, Germany, etc. We had an expert give the lecture, and then we had this Chinese who was expert in this area and was very good in English get up and give about a 15-minute resume of what he felt to be the really important points, you see.
In Chinese.
In Chinese. And I must tell you that as this program developed, the really key management people came out of that course in China. And they were extremely grateful for the IEA sponsoring that course. So I must tell you, I think I've been one of the most fortunate men in the world to have the very, very fascinating career that I had, and the very wonderful people that I was associated with and got to know and to work with in the Atomic Energy Commission, my entire staff, the people in the IEA from many, many, many countries, and then in visiting all of these countries and putting on training courses, it was a very wonderful career.
The way you described it and the way I knew about it, I think of you as having really two careers, as you mentioned yourself.
That's correct.
And of these two careers, one was in developing safety standards and the
correct.
philosophy of it, and the other one's in training manpower to person power, I'd like to be politically correct here, to developing technically qualified persons to administer this. Of all the, and you have so many accomplishments, it just staggers the imagination. But of all the things you've done, which do you think, if you were to choose one single contribution to the field of radiation safety, what would you single out, if you can single one out?
I don't think I could single one out, Herman, for this reason. I think I had to go through this process from the trenches all the way up in order to do what I did later on. Now, let me explain a little bit further. Without the experience that I had in the standards development area and developing the policy and the conviction that we have to look at the whole rather than a segment. In other words, integrating nuclear safety, what we call radiation protection, design, the whole bit. Without going through that experience and having that responsibility, which, by the way, was much enhanced, not only by my position as Director of Regulatory Standards, but the experience which I gained in implementing the National Environmental Policy Act. Because there, we had to do cost-benefit analysis, we had to look at alternatives, we had to look at an alternative control system, alternative containments, alternative everything. And it was through this, and then working with the people from ANSI and the technical committees of ASTL, American Standards for Testing of Materials, and ANS, American Nuclear Society, and working with those men, that I came to the conviction, which I did, that in my mind, there's two extremely important things, key things, if I could summarize them. One is orderliness, which means standards, standardization in the whole system, which is only orderliness. It's not ad hoc decision.
Logical orderliness.
Logical orderliness, and it's not, and you don't depend on ad hoc decisions. And the second point is the manpower development, the training. And it's important to train technical people, but if they're simply going to do a technical job, while they need to understand the whole, through their education, they got most of the technical. But if you want, and I must say, I think you need technical people, strong technical people, in the top tier of management. And that top tier of management, you really don't learn that in the university. And it has to be done by experience and through
What's called OJT, on-the-job training.
OJT. So I came to the conclusion that it's those two areas that I wanted to concentrate to, and I must say that I gave about, let's see now, let me not exaggerate, about 40 years of my life at least that much to those two areas. And at times it was traumatic, and I think as Jim Ramey told me when he presented the Atomic Energy Commission's Distinguished Service Award.
He was the chairman of the AEC, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. He was one of the commissioners. Yeah, he was really the top commissioner after the chair. Dixie Lee Ray was chairman of that. A wonderful, wonderful person. But anyway, somewhere in Jim's presentation, he kind of goes through my career, and he says, after I was Director of Radiation Protection, and we were talking about developing Part 20, he said, about this time I think Les thought, well, now I can settle down and have a fairly peaceful life. And he said that might have been so, except for the Calvert Cliffs Court decision on the National Environmental Policy Act, and later when we named him Director of Regulatory Standards and gave him the responsibility for, and he calls it a massive program to develop standards. And I must tell you that for a few years, both myself and my staff were working 14, 15 hours a day, and it was not to earn more money, it was because we were enthusiastic about what we were doing, and we really believed in what we were doing.
That's excellent. By the way, I've been curious for a long time, Les, as to how you feel maybe your 1 year of teaching in high school might have helped you in all these training programs that you later developed. Was there any relationship between that experience?
Well, the only relationship is I love teaching.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that I went so heavily into teaching and training after I retired from the Atomic Energy Commission.
And you knew the art of teaching, didn't you? You felt the art.
Oh yeah, well it's built in me. I love to teach.
Yes, I think the ability to teach, you can't learn that.
That's right, you can't.
You either know how to do it or you don't.
Did you take education courses before you taught high school?
Very few.
You did take some education theory.
I think so.
Uh-huh.
But, Al, I don't know, you can't explain it. I mean, a teacher, he's curious, but he's also loved to see other people curious. And that teacher is trying to bring out the curiosity in that individual and to develop it into a very, very good result. I mean, and it's the thrill of seeing a youngster being enthusiastic. I've got a little grandson. He's my youngest son, and he's been put into advanced training because he's very far ahead of his present group. And he is so discerning and curious. And we were walking along one day, he's holding my hand, and here's a 7-year-old kid. And he said, this is not related to science. He said, Granddad, don't you wish you were a kid again? And I thought a little bit. I said, well, I don't know, Ian. You know, all of these ages has its advantage. And then he said, well, Granddad, all except getting old. Now, this 7-year-old kid. I said, now, Ian, really, there's some advantages to getting old. But he's got that curiosity, and you can see it. And it's a thrill for a teacher to see that drawn out and developed, and then you like to follow the career of those people. Is that right, Herman?
Yes. I was going to say, I was going to ask you something else, but wanted to say in this context that one of the Talmudic sages was asked a similar question about how he learned and so on, and he said, I learned much from my parents, they were role models, and I learned much from my teachers, but the most that I learned was from my students who followed me.
That's exactly right.
And I was going to ask, despite all the safety records and despite the fact that roughly 20% of our electricity is nuclear generated, and despite the fact that most of what we really understand about physiology and medicine and so on comes from research that was conducted with radioactive nuclides, nevertheless, the outlook for nuclear activities in the United States seems to be relatively dim, and the educational programs in various universities seem to be closing down, and I don't know where the next manpower will come from to continue this. I wonder, do you have any comments or any opinions as to why we have this apparent decline in nuclear activities when as a matter of fact, the next person to die from commercial nuclear power in the United States will be the first one. And this is in sharp contrast to every other source of energy. Despite this enormous safety record, we seem to be on a, not seem to be, we are on a decline and not even considering the use of nuclear energy now as an alternative in these days of energy crises, one after another. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on the reasons for this and whether anything can be done to stop this decline?
Well, Herman, you know, I really, maybe I should not express my deep views on this, but
I think you should.
there was a time during even the Truman administration and some of the administrations that followed him, during the 50s, the early 60s, you had people who had the character and the determination in the political arena and in the government arena to be realistic in looking at what we really had to do to get out of this fossil fuel cycle, which we're going to be forced to get out of sooner or later. And as you know, during the 50s and the 60s, there was strong support for going ahead with nuclear power, and fortunately, we were able to build quite a large number of nuclear power plants, and as you say, about 20%. And incidentally, we probably had the hottest summer on record in Arizona this year, and the Palo Verde 3 units, each 1,300 megawatts, saved the day for us. If it had not been for those 3 nuclear power plants, we'd have been in deep trouble. All our reservoirs are way, way down. We've depended on hydropower pretty strong here. And I simply cannot understand why even in the present presidential election, we do not hear about alternative energy sources. I mean large energy sources. You may hear a little bit about fuel cells, which are important, and so forth. But the thrust is either let's dig for more oil. We're still tied strongly to fossil fuel. And surely someone in government, and you do have to have the support of government to go ahead with this. Otherwise, you get public opposition, unless you got strong support by people who develop public opinion. I don't think the public understands the fact that fossil fuels are not only finite, but they're also probably the worst thing we can do for our environment. This aspect of earth warming is not fictitious, it's happening, and yet we seem to not be able to get off the road. I think sooner or later we're going to be forced to. I think we will go back to nuclear of some form, some type, either probably fission or fusion or maybe both, and we should still be working very diligently at it. France had the foresight to go ahead. They developed, they generate about 75%, I believe 75.
A little more than
I
that.
think it's heard
80%
80% recently.
Yeah, of their energy through nuclear. There's been no, they have about the same record we do with respect to safety. Isn't that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So I'm at a loss to understand, but you know, it's going to take courage for someone in a high level, because it's not popular. Nuclear energy is still not popular among them.
That's right, but the activities of the U.S. government help to stimulate the unpopularity.
Oh yes, because a reaction to the unreasonable. So,
So what can be done to reverse this trend?
don't we wish we knew?
I don't know. I do know, but I think it's
but
impractical.
I think the thing that has to be done to reverse it is whatever administration gets in, to initiate a information program and a strong policy program with respect to a real energy policy, looking at all alternatives with far greater input into research with respect to developing the alternative sources of energy. I must say that, as you know, there was a program, which is probably diminished now, a very strong program between the United States and Japan in developing advanced concepts of reactors, and we now have on the drawing board designs of reactors which are even more advanced than the present ones, and they provide almost certain safety. The probability of an accident is extremely, extremely low. But I think you have to have the support, the strong support of an energy policy from the government administration before it's going anywhere. The industry itself cannot simply say, well, we're going anyway. They have to be licensed. They have to have
That's
the
correct.
cooperation of the government. And without it, they cannot put in millions and billions of dollars without some certainty that there's going to be a return.
I concluded a long time ago, it takes the President of the United States himself, or herself, to understand this and to promote it, because that's the only person who can get truth directly to the public, because the press will continue to play up the scare stories of those few people who call themselves scientists, but continue to oppose nuclear energy as being the most dangerous thing, which it is not.
But any president has got to have a very, very strong energy secretary or someone who really can advise him. The president himself, he's got too many things to think about. But I agree with you that the president should take the initiative in supporting it and being seen to support it. But he first has to get a very, very strong Secretary of Energy that believes in it.
Well, if the president were to believe in it, he would find such a
That's
person.
exactly right. That's right. There's no question.
So the secretary reflects the philosophy
That's
of the
correct.
president.
Yeah, you're right. So it has to start with the president.
Yes, as Alan pointed out.
Do you see any prospects of this, Dr. Simber?
Well, so far, this
Maybe
campaign,
we're getting into
yes,
we
we're
should get
becoming
into it.
political, but, well, no, this is apolitical
It's very
because neither party has mentioned nuclear power or energy at all. Both sides have lightly mentioned the importance of energy.
Alternative sources, they call it.
Yes, without really going into any kind of details. Neither side has mentioned nuclear as a possibility.
I did, however,
However, I was going to say, in RadSafe, and I get several hundred messages every day, and there was several messages about $600 million, and I didn't open it up to read it. Just I saw it the other day, $600 million was appropriated presently for the continuation of some nuclear power project. Do you know anything about that? It was one of the several hundred messages I get every day from
well, that's good
RadSafe.
news. I want to say, though, I did hear one spark of truth from Bill Richardson, Secretary of Energy. I was listening to C-SPAN a couple weeks ago, and there was one, the host was particularly questioning him with sharp questions. And the final question, since Bill Richardson didn't mention nuclear, was, well, isn't nuclear energy clean? And Bill Richardson, you could see, he felt it might not be political. You heard silence and hemming and hawing for He finally said, yes, it is clean, from the Secretary of Energy. It is clean, but then he said, but we will probably need to wait to the next administration for this solving of the problem of high-level waste,
Yes.
whether the site
Well,
is safe.
we all know, I mean, those of us who are technically in this know that nuclear waste, the problems are only socio-political. They're not scientific or engineering, because we know how to manage the high-level nuclear waste. It's managed successfully in France with the vitrification process. And once these radioactive nuclides are physically and chemically incorporated into the glass, the only way it could be released to the environment is by the dissolution of the glass beads. And we have a model, Merrill Eisenbud did a lot of studies on that in South America, and there's a glass formation there that has lots of thorium in it, and it's estimated, the geologists estimate it to be 65 million years old, and I guess there's a little plus or minus on there. But in all that time, the thorium still is in there and it hasn't leached out. And so the glass is not really dissolving. So it's all strictly I believe,
Yes.
a socio-political problem and not a scientific and engineering.
And Herman, you may remember that I dragged you into giving one talk before a Health Physics Society meeting with me, where I presented to you my one publication, a letter to the editor, showing by simple calculation that it's absurd to worry about the risks of nuclear materials buried underneath the ground.
Yes, I remember you.
And you're pointing out now they also do encase it in this kind of glass.
Yes, if it's vitrified like that.
You know, Alan, there's one little statement I would like to add. I think, as I indicated, one of the great privileges I've had is working with absolutely wonderful people.
That gets into what I want to ask.
No, you know.
Can you mention some of them? That was another question.
No, but I wanted to say, I'm sitting here with two, Alan Brodsky and Herman Sember, and it's such a privilege to have them here in the cabin up at the Gentry in the mountains of Arizona, particularly since where our paths have crossed many, many, many times. Herman Sember supported me in training courses, both at Argonne, in other countries. I have never called Herman that he was not responsive. And Alan worked with me, Alan Brodsky worked with me in the Atomic Energy Commission. And our paths have crossed many, many times in many ways. We've just finished a 50th reunion of our fellowship group, Dr. L.D. Anderson, who was a great inspiration, not only an inspiration, a great teacher and a help to us, more than a help. She was, she made our careers. And
Yes.
Literally so.
Yes.
that's exactly right. And I must say, I used to ride out to the lab with her. She was good enough to give me a ride.
Mm.
And she's not only a great, great teacher and scientist, but she's also a great, great woman. But,
We all loved her.
Anyway, we just finished the 50th reunion of this group that was in Oak Ridge in
4950, yeah.
4950. And our group is not all here these days, but I must say it's been a real, real wonderful experience. And particularly to have these two gentlemen, Herman Simber. So it's been a real great pleasure to
Well, if
to
we're
have
talking,
here.
if we're talking about wives, I would just, I don't know whether this is already in here or not.
By the way,
If it is, you can edit it out. But at the very first, I think it was the planning meeting or the very first meeting of the Health Physics Society was held in Frank Bradley's house in Columbus, Ohio. And the first, quote, banquet that we had was cooked by Bonnie Bradley and Sylvia Sember.
Hooray, hooray. Members of our class, yes. Associate members of our class.
Yes,
Yes.
honorary members.
But I was not asking, it was very kind to mention our names, but I was thinking about other people along the way that you might want to mention. You've known so many top people of the world that I've never met. I've met a few, but you've been all over the world, met so many people like Dixie Lee Ray and so on. Do you want to mention any other people?
Well, yeah, and Herman mentioned Dr. Glenn Seaborg.
Yes, he was
who was
wonderful.
chairman of the commission. And I knew him quite well. As a matter of fact, he asked me when I was director of radiation protection standards, the two of us would go to the Washington Post and some of the other newspapers when there was such controversy, public controversy on radiation protection. And these were off the cuff discussions with the editors to try to educate them or try to inform them of the commission programs on radiation protection, the industry programs on radiation protection, and also try to give some perspective to risk and what, and comparative exposure from natural backgrounds to try to educate them so that they'd be a little more intelligent in writing their articles. And let me tell you, Glenn Seaborg did a great job. He was a wonderful statesman, and he was a wonderful scientist, and he was a wonderful man.
Head of universities. I met him in a reception line once. A wonderful man to talk to,
Yeah.
talk with. He was just as friendly as could be the first time you would meet him.
Dr. Jerry Tate, who was also a commissioner, and he would come down to South America on certain occasions and to support me when I was scientific representative there. Well, I've known many Harold Price, who was director of the program before it expanded, so the director of, what they call it, licensing or something. But
Division of Licensing and Regulation, I think it was at the
yeah.
time.
Bill Anders,
An astronaut.
he was an astronaut, and he worked very closely with me on standards, because he understood the importance of standards, being an astronaut.
Yeah.
And when I announced I was going to retire, he called me up to his office, and he tried to convince me to stay. And he said, Les, know, you've got a great future in the economy. And I told him, look, I have an opportunity to go to Arizona and buy into my brother's ranch and buy the gentry. And I said, you know, I've been working a long, long time. And I've got a letter, I might provide you with a copy of it, that he later wrote me and said, I guess it was after Chalker wrote me a letter from the answer. He said, I'm very glad the American National Standards Institute agreed to, sent you that commendation and so forth. And then on the bottom of the letter, he penned a note. Do you have room for another cowhand out there? You know, Alan, I hesitate to go through and mention too many names because I'll leave out too many.
I know there are many, many.
And, yeah, and so I think, you know, I mentioned Jamais from France. And by the way, I had the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission's son out here. Now I can't remember the name. His son was 17 years old, and he asked if I would mind him coming out. He wanted to come out to a western country place. I had my horses at that time, and I rode with him. I gave him one of my horses. I took over. We rode together, and we would ride over to the Fort Apache Indian Reservation to the Canyon Creek there, and we'd fish a little bit, ride back. I think he was here twice. And
Was his father the professor?
Pardon?
Was his father the professor of nuclear engineering?
No, he was chairman of the French Atomic Energy Commission.
Oh, the French Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah, and
Is this Jamais you're talking about?
no, Jamais was not. No, he was. Jamais was on ICRP, and he was.
Yes, I know he was an ICRP.
He's a physician.
Yes, I know, but wasn't he a member of the French Atomic Energy Commission?
Oh yeah, sure, but it wasn't his son.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the name. You know, I'm 78 years old, so my computer chips are beginning to fade a bit. But anyway, this was 70-year-old son. One day we're riding through the forest, and he asked me, what is all this background noise? It just continues here. It sounds so good. And what it was the wind going through the pine trees, you see.
Mm-hmm.
But I've known, look, I've really been a privileged person.
Yeah.
But I could mention many, many more.
Yeah, you already
But I
mentioned.
don't like to leave out people.
Yeah, you already mentioned Benenson.
Well, I mentioned several.
I know you worked with great
By the
people.
way, for the record, Les has mentioned the letter here by Chalker
Yeah.
several times, I think.
Yeah.
For the record, could I read this into the record?
Sure,
It's
if
a
you feel
short letter.
you'd like to do that now, sure.
This was on the occasion of Les's retirement, and it's dated oh, that's my birthday, my heavens, January 14th, 1975. The month and the day was correct, but not the year. It says, Dear Les,
You had a birthday that day.
but that's not my birthday date. It's my birth. Anyway, that's something else. Dear Les, on behalf of the American National Standards Institute and its Nuclear Technical Advisory Board, I would like to commend you for your efforts in promoting the development of high-quality standards for the nuclear industry. You have had the foresight to see that the nuclear industry and government standards program could be strengthened by close coordination and cooperation. Through the American National Standards Institute, you explored new ways to further this spirit of cooperation and improve the relationship between voluntary and governmental standards programs. Your leadership, the coordination of efforts of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and the American National Standards Institute have maximized the effectiveness of both industry and government standards. By working through the ANSI, that's the American National Standards Institute, for those of you who are not technically into this, by working through the ANSI structure, you help to develop a means of coordinating those government standards and that establish acceptable levels of performance with these industry standards that describe how to achieve these levels of performance. Through this approach, industry experience has been incorporated into the standards, while at the same time, continued independent evaluation and judgment by responsible government agencies has been assured. You not only had the wisdom to adopt this approach, but also had the management skill and enthusiasm to bring these changes within the voluntary and government standards program. In recognizing these important accomplishments, we offer the congratulations and appreciation of those with whom you have been associated in the development of these standards. Sincerely signed, Ralph G. Chalker, Chairman of the Nuclear Technical Advisory Board.
I might add, it reminds me that I benefited in having the privilege of seeing this program continued after Les retired. I was given the responsibility by Bob Alexander, who worked for him, in developing a whole range of standards in radiation protection, bioassay standards for all the radionuclides, survey standards for industry, survey standards for hospitals, quality assurance standards for bioassay laboratory, analytical laboratories. All these things came about, and it was such a great privilege and pleasure for me to be able to pursue this. Since when I was chairman of standards, as Elda Anderson appointed me in 1959 to 61, I tried to get the Health Physics Society to get involved in this kind of thing. Was not quite able to do that. Later on, I was able to do that in 1967 to 70 when I was chairman again. And we began to write our national standards. So the Health Physics Society and the wisdom of the health physicists who were incorporated through the program that Les set up was integrated in the development of a whole range of applied health physics standards of this kind, and it was done in a proper scientific way to make the industry safer, all of these industries.
Well, after hearing all of this from both Les and from Alan, it's easy to see why when I started this interview, I said, I cannot think of a single person who has contributed more than Lester Rogers to the safe applications of nuclear energy and radioactivity.
And I think that may be a bit of an exaggeration.
No,
Not at all.
I don't think so.
Amen. Amen.
I absolutely do not
Amen.
think so.
I think I'll shut off the tape at this point because it's actually very timely. The tape is almost finished. In concluding this series of interviews of the class, Elda Anderson class of 1949 to 50, which was the first class, there was a previous one class, AEC NRC, which also had famous people, which will be illustrious people. We're focusing, however, on Elda Anderson's first class here, on this 50th reunion. Now, Forrest Buck was at the reunion. Forrest Buck was one of the 11. He did attend this reunion, but he was reticent to be interviewed, feeling that he did not continue in health physics. He went back into the chemical business, opened his own company.
Well, he did continue explicitly, but implicitly.
But implicitly, he was supportive in that he always belonged to the Health Physics Society. He still does, and he has contributed his journals to his college, Franklin and Marshall. Okay. Now, I do have some video of Forrest that I may dub into this series.